Welcome into the episode of Patrick Jones Baseball. In this week's episode, we have Keith Madison on the podcast. Keith is a former college baseball coach. He was a head coach in the SEC for over 25 years. He's an author. He's someone who brings a really cool perspective to this episode and talks a lot about coaches and burning out and just honestly just having more of that well-balanced life on and off the field. Which I think is unique because most of the time we're on here, we're talking about mechanics or different tactics or things like that. But I think focusing on things like this will allow more coaches to actually coach better and stay in the game a lot longer. So hope you enjoyed this episode. Keith just came out with a new book, which is called Coaching with Purpose. Highly suggest you check it out. We'll put the links in the show notes for that as well. So here we go with Keith Madison. All right, we now welcome onto the podcast Keith Madison. Keith, thanks for coming on today.
Absolutely, Patrick. I've been looking forward to this.
This is good stuff. So, I mean, you're someone you've been in the game of baseball a long time, and you were a head coach in the SEC for 25 years. You're an author now. You're somebody who we were talking beforehand, and I'm excited about this episode because a lot of times when coaches come on the podcast, we talk about the sexy things, right? The mechanics, even the mental, like there's all these different things. But I think what intrigued me about you and us, having this conversation was we're going to talk about something a little bit different, which I think is something that is extremely important to talk about. And I've dealt with it before. You don't hear people talking about it because I think a lot of times it's kind of like you just got to suck it up type of a mentality. But a lot of it is it comes down to just, coaches who are been in the game, maybe they don't have a lot of balance. They're burned out. What are some of the things that you noticed yourself from a coach, 25 years as the head coach in an SEC, when it comes to just that balance and being able to handle the off the field and on the field things that go on as a coach?
Yeah, no matter which area you coach, whether it's travel baseball or high school baseball or college baseball, everybody they all have these challenges. And sometimes the challenges become bigger than what we're trying to accomplish. They get in the way, in other words. And I know I coached at the high school level when I first started coaching, and it was the teaching load. It was the parents who some of them were awesome and they were supportive. Others were meddling. And that's not a kind word, but that's what happens sometimes. And then at the college level, of course, there's the NIL now and the transfer portal. I didn't deal with those when I coached, but I coached with other issues. I dealt with other issues that were challenges. I try to help coaches navigate the challenges they face. And because I've experienced so many of those, I remember a time in my coaching career a long time ago, we got off to a rough start, and then we sort of turned it around and we started playing really well. And we were at Mississippi State, and I was so tired. I was just exhausted from the travel and the competition, the practice, the planning, the one-on-one meetings with players, 7 days a week. It was relentless. And I was a young man then, but we were down there, and I remember going for this walk one morning with my brother. He was at Starkville to watch us play. And about halfway through our walk and our little discussion, I said, Tom, man, I think this is it. I think after this season, I'm going to do something else. I'm exhausted and I'm not enjoying it like I did when I first started coaching. And he was very wise. He said, hey, just be patient. You're going through a stretch right now where you've been on the road a lot and you are tired, but you guys are playing well. You need to hang in there for the players. And so we ended up having a tremendous year that year. We lost to Stanford, I think, in the finals of the NCAA regionals. And, we were one out away from going to the College World Series, and Stanford goes to the College World Series and wins it that year. So we put together a really good year. And so sometimes what I tell coaches is just take a deep breath, just be patient. I remember that advice my brother gave to me long ago. And so I think sometimes it's easy to make decisions when you're not in a good place. If you're struggling, if you are tired or you have negative thoughts, you need to step back and just take a deep breath and let things play out a little bit. So since I got out of coaching, I've been spending a lot of time mentoring coaches and just helping them through those type of situations and other situations as well. So it's been a good journey.
Take me back to When you first started coaching, I mean, obviously you coached at Kentucky for a really long time and had a ton of good players and things like that. Like when you first started out coaching, maybe your first few years versus your last few years, like was it just life things that kind of got in the way in terms of like it carried over onto the field from off the field? Or like what were some of the things that you feel like were different, the older you got and the longer you were in coaching that maybe affected how you were as a coach?
Yeah, when I first started at Kentucky, when I accepted the job, I was only 26 years old. I was the youngest Division I coach in the nation. So I had so much energy and so much passion for the game. And even though we were at that time at a disadvantage with facilities and weather and budget and many other things, it was like nothing's going to hold me back. I'm going to get this done and I'm going to build a good program here and we're going to have fun. We're going to have success. So when you're young, you have energy and passion on your side. And then as you mature as a coach, you finally figure out that, hey, this is not about me. This is about the players I coach. And so my focus changed after a few years of coaching, and that I realized why God allowed me the opportunity as a young coach to be in the position I was in. And so I really started pouring my focus into the players and trying to be the best at development that I could be and to be on top of the latest trends in college baseball. And uh, I proudly say that I was a lifetime learner. When I would go to baseball clinics and things like that, I was just trying to soak up as much knowledge as I could. And then life happens, things happen. You have a losing season, you know, uh, in 1989 at the age of 39, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. All of these things can contribute to burnout because you have an incredibly competitive situation in the coaching world and in the competition world. And then you have life, you have a wife, you have children, most likely, you have bills to pay, you have all these things going on. And sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. And a lot of times people look at coaches, whether it's travel ball or college ball or high school, and they say, man, they've got it made. Their summers are off. And, but that's not the way it is. It's pretty much 24/7, 365 days a year. So, yeah, you have to be balanced, Patrick. You're right. You have to be balanced, and you have to make sure that you're not taking that competitiveness, that those dynamics you have with your players home with you. You have to transition between that drive from the ballpark to the home into being a father, into being a husband, or just being like I remember having bad practices. And when I first started coaching, I'd take those home. And I remember this story. We had a horrible practice, and I had about a 20-minute drive between the field and my house. And I'm thinking on the way to home, I'm thinking, I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't even want to eat dinner. I just want to be alone. And so I pull in the garage and I open up the door, and my 10-year-old son, who at that time was a little bit overweight, he had nothing on but his basketball shorts and some socks. And he comes sliding into the kitchen and he said, look at me, Dad, I'm a chubby boy. And for some reason, that just cracked me up. And I just started laughing. And I'm thinking, hey, this is what it's about now. When I'm on the field, there's nothing I can do to help my family. So I need to pour into the players. But when I'm at home, there's nothing I can do for my players. So I need to pour into my family. And that little funny instance just kind of helped me to realize, be where you are and be the best you can be where you are. And don't carry that lousy practice home with you. Make that transition on the way home.
Do you feel like we lose out in this game? We lose a lot of really good coaches to burnout. Like one of the things that I do see and notice is I do see some college coaches, or maybe they leave the college game and maybe they go into the private sector, or maybe they go and just get a regular job working 9 to 5. Like I assume part of that is probably money standpoint, but I'm sure part of that is just, man, it can be a hard lifestyle from a recruiting standpoint, from being on the road with practices. It's not like just it's a regular 9 to 5 job. I mean, what advice have you given coaches who have been struggling with that?
Yeah, I had to learn that the hard way. I didn't really have anyone giving me that advice because I just chose to be around people that were as competitive as I was, and that were as driven as I was. So I had to learn it the hard way. And I think that instance I shared before with my wife being diagnosed with breast cancer, that rocked my world. That woke me up. But my advice would be to don't let something tragic have to happen before you become more balanced. Just make that decision and carve out time on your schedule to be with your family, carve out time even to be alone and to take a deep
Mm.
breath. We all need rest. We all need a break. And I remember a lot of the vacations early on in my coaching career, I would build my vacation around going to the Cape Cod League and watching my players play,
Yeah.
or going to some showcase or some tournament. And it's like, man, I finally realized that's not a vacation.
Mm.
That's a workcation. My family probably doesn't enjoy it that much. And so we really need to carve out some time. And I was talking to the current Kentucky coach, Nick Mangione, just last week. And he said, Coach, this was the best summer of my life. My son did not play baseball this year. This was probably the only year of his life when he's, as long as he wants to play, that he's not going to play. And we just took out 2 weeks just to be a family. And he said, we enjoyed that so much. And I said, that is so healthy. And you're going to come back with more energy, more patience, more ways to help your players now, because you're not just on edge all the time. You're not going through that pressure. So I think that's it. You carve out time. When you're home, you're home. When you're at work, you're at work. And that's the advice I would give. And don't let, get off your screens. Just take time away from your phone, away from your iPad, and just enjoy. I mean, I battle it, and I'm at my age, I still battle it, and I'm sure younger people battle it more. But I mean, it's so tempting to just always be on your phone, texting this person back, or responding to this person, or maybe even just scrolling social media, to see what's going on. And we need to set the phone aside. We need to set the work aside. We need to be with friends, with family, and just carve out that time so that we don't get burned out.
I think there's even research to show that actually you'll be even more productive as a coach if you do set that time aside. And so, it's really honestly, it's time blocking, right? Where it's like, you can even go into your calendar, for example, and maybe from 5 to 7 or 5 to 8, you time block like, hey, this is family time, and you're not allowed to do anything else except spend time with your family, like whatever that entails. Like, there's no texting, there's no, like, you're not allowed to look at your phone. You're not, and so actually, it does two things, right? It allows you to be present in the moment, and now you're with your family. But it's actually also teaching your brain how to focus, because when you feel the urge to want to go and do something else, and you tell yourself, no, like, we're actually staying right here, we're going to stay in this moment, like, we're not going to go and do what you want to do. You're teaching like, that's how you teach yourself how to focus. So when you do get into work and you do switch that off, it's like, okay, now it's work time. Over time, you're training yourself how to focus and build even mental skills by doing that as well. So it really does, if you do buy into it, it helps you in every category of your life.
No doubt about it. And I've seen it work in my own life. And I've made this commitment recently. I'm not gonna look at my phone during dinner with my wife. I'm just not going to do that. That's rude. And so unless she asks me to show her something on my phone or something like that, it's put away.
Hmm.
And I just think that's healthy, and I think that's respectful. I remember the first problem I had with this. I was meeting with a recruit, and this was towards the end of my career, when people were, it was just the beginning of the whole social media, you know, texting and all that. And here this guy was sitting across from me. He was 18 years old, and he was on 17 years old. He was on an official visit. And if I wasn't talking to him, he was looking down on his phone. And I thought, man, when I was his age, I think I would have almost been, not that I deserve this, but I would have been in awe of a Division I coach. And I would have wanted to give him my full attention, but he was so addicted to social media or whatever he was doing that he couldn't even give me his full attention. And so needless to say, he went to another school, but but sometimes we look at high school players or college players and we see that problem, but you know what? It's not just young people. It's young people, it's middle-aged people, it's even people my age because it's so addictive. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a good thing. I mean, I love staying in touch with people, but we just need to be disciplined and we need to know that it can be a problem. It can be a part of coaches' burnout.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question, Keith. Let's say now knowing what you know with all your experience as being a head coach and just having now worked with coaches, what would be like a tip? Like we're in the fall, we're recording this, it's September, so fall ball's going on. What would be a typical day that you would recommend for a coach in terms of like you get to the field at this time and you leave at this time and then you check your phone maybe one time later on in the day. Like how would you structure your day? I guess what I'm asking as a coach to kind of preserve you having that consistency over a long period of time and not getting burned out.
Yeah, that is a great question. That is a great question. And very few people, if anyone, has ever asked me that question except another coach. And I would say that, and this is what has worked for me. I'm not saying everybody has to do it this way, but you need a way. You need a plan. And this is what has worked for me. I would get up in the morning and I love coffee and I would have my cup of coffee, but I'd also have a quiet time. I would get up before anyone else and I would go into a room that's quiet and I would have prayer and meditation and I would open up my Bible and I would receive peace from that. And that is a great way to start your day. And I would ask God for wisdom for that day. And when I would do it that way, my days went much better. If I was too busy to do that, or if I had to really real early meeting or something like that, and I left out my quiet time, my day felt more frantic. It felt like there was more stress. And so I think the way you start your day off dictates sort of what your day is going to look like. And then from that quiet time, I would have, when my sons were at home, I would have breakfast with them before school, even if it was 10 minutes or 15 minutes, because you probably remember how rushed it is, in the morning when kids are going to school. My wife was a teacher. Everybody's going in a different direction. So, but you got to carve out that time. And then just being with family also gives you a sense of purpose. And it helped my day to get off to a better start. And then I would go into the office and then I would have my office plan where I set aside a certain amount of time where I was going to return phone calls, set a certain amount of time where I was going to be proactive and maybe work on recruiting or scheduling, calling coaches and asking about certain players, or calling a college coach and asking about the potential of scheduling. And then I would always try to have lunch, a brief lunch with either one or two or all of my coaching staff, just so that we could relax before practice. And then after lunch, we're getting ready for practice. I would also in the morning have a time where I would schedule my practice plan. I would take at least 30 or 45 minutes, meet with my staff and say, what do we need to accomplish in practice today? Let's look at doing this or that. And then I would come up with a practice plan. And then during practice, of course, I would have a plan of what we wanted to accomplish. Then after practice, I shower, go home, make a couple of recruiting calls, to be honest with you, on my way home, get home, dinner with my family. And then I would carve out, and being married to a coach is not easy. I would carve out maybe 30 or 45 minutes where I'd make more recruiting calls, but the rest of the time I would spend with my family. So I think, that might not be a perfect plan for every coach, but for me, it worked. And I think the important thing is to start off your day in a positive way, to have a plan. Don't just expect things to happen on their own. You got to plan it. You got to schedule it.
Yeah, and I can only imagine too. I mean, you start out for the day and the first thing you do is you look at your phone. It's like, man, like now you're in reactive mode for the rest of the day, just because now you got all these texts or emails and stuff like that. So I mean, that's one of the things that I try to do is I don't look at my phone at all for the first hour by the time from time I wake up to the time I look at my phone. And it's kind of just treating my brain just like it's a dog in the sense, or it's like, this is what you're going to do at this time. This is what you're going to do at this time. Because like you said, the days I don't have a plan, I don't put together a plan the day before. When I wake up that next day, I'm in that reactive mindset. So I think that's great advice. And then there's also a lot of coaches out there who don't have families. And I think that can be a thing where it's like you can work 24/7 because even when you're home alone, it's like, I mean, you see the phone just staring at you and you don't have, someone else or your family to take care of. And so it's like you just work even more, and that can even, spin into now even more burnout down the road.
Boy, that's exactly right. I just recently I spent time with an assistant coach who is a recruiting coordinator, and he's single, and his entire life is built around work. For me, my quiet time in the morning was a really healthy escape. A breakfast with my family was a healthy escape. When I got home, dinner with my family was a healthy escape. This young man had no escape. He didn't play golf. He didn't fish. He didn't even have a girlfriend. All he did was work, and he took a lot of pride in his work. He wore that as a badge of honor that I work 16 hours a day. I'm the best at what I do. That's not going to last very long. He's going to experience that B word, burnout, at some point soon, probably, unless he changes direction and finds some peace in his life.
And I think too, I think part of the issue is because we have access and see what other people are doing in other industries. You look at, let's just say, take an extreme example, like somebody like an Elon Musk, where it's like, man, that guy works every second of the day. He bets everything on the line. He's focused. He does all these things, and yet he clearly still hasn't gotten burned out because he's still going. But what I always say is like, there's freaks out there. There's freaks out there, and there's also guys who can dunk from the free throw line. Doesn't mean you can do it either.
That's right. Exactly. That's the truth. And we're all different. And what I need in my life to give me, the joy and the peace that I need is different than what you have. We're just made different. We're put together differently. I really, for me, family is incredibly important. Well, for some young coaches, it's not. They're sort of married to baseball, and that's good for a while. But I wonder what's their life going to be like, when baseball is over. So we all are like you're exactly right. We all have different gifts. We all have different strengths, and we all have different weaknesses, and we have to adjust to those to make it work for us.
Keith, growing up, did you envision yourself becoming a coach one day?
No, I envisioned myself being a Major League Baseball player. That was, I mean, I was one of those kids, when I would get up, if we had a game that night, and when I was 10 years old, I would put my uniform on before lunch, and then I would go out and play catch, or I would throw the ball off a brick wall and work on my fielding. And I would look at the sky to make sure there weren't any rain clouds. I did not want to rain out. I mean, that was the kid I was. And so, and I would, back in those days, Patrick, we could only watch maybe one baseball game a week. And so it was big, when we watched the Yankees play the White Sox, or we watched the Reds play the Cardinals. That was huge. And so I would watch those players and I would think that's what I want to do. And so I just spent so much time, developing my skills. I was a pitcher. And so I did everything I could to make it. And I got an opportunity, and I played, 2 years in the Expos organization and 3 years in the Reds organization, made it to AAA, but I didn't make it to the big leagues. So now I didn't have a plan B. So, I go to college, I get an education. I decide, hey, I love baseball. I probably know more about baseball than anything else in my life. Why don't I try coaching? I had no clue what that involved. And then I got this coaching job in Lake Wales, Florida, coaching high school ball. And you know what really fired me up as a coach? It wasn't so much, well, I mean, yeah, I was a competitor. I love the competition. I love to win. But it was hanging out with the players And I realized what I missed about playing baseball wasn't just the competition, it was the camaraderie and it was the relationships you build. It was fun. And so these high school players, I fed off their energy just like I had that energy when I was their age. And so I really got into it. And then I got a chance to be a graduate assistant coach at Mississippi State University under the legendary Ron Polk. And he was a baseball encyclopedia. I learned so much baseball. I learned more baseball in 1 year than all 5 years of my minor league baseball experience, just working for him. And the main thing is I learned how to be a coach. And so, yeah, I made that transition thinking that my dream was to be a major league baseball player, and that dream didn't come true. So now what do I do? And then I really feel like God opened up the door for me to coach and at the college level. And I realized about 5 years into coaching that I love coaching even more than I love playing. And I think the reason I felt that way is because as a player, especially as a professional player, your goal is to make it to the major leagues. And it's all about what I'm doing to make it to the major leagues. And when you become a coach, now it's about the players and pouring into them and adding value to their lives. And if you have 30 players on your team or 25 players on your team, it's almost like you're impacting 25 players instead of just one, myself. And so I really got into that, and I stay in touch with players I coached my first year coaching because I really value the relationship part of it.
Parents, are you tired of spending money going from showcase to camp, not even knowing if a coach is even looking for your son's position or even knows his name? One of the reasons that I started my college baseball recruiting service is to help guide families throughout the recruiting process so you're not having to waste money and time going from showcase or camp to camp. If you're interested in hearing more about how I can help your son, head to patrickjonesbaseball.com and fill out the form. That's patrickjonesbaseball.com, fill out the form right on the homepage, and I'll be in touch. All right, back to the podcast. How would you juggle the relationship? Like, let's just say Keith, you decided to come back coaching today. How would you juggle the relationship part of it with the fact that, hey, if you're coaching at like an SEC program and you don't produce, like, we're going to have to cut you. At that
Yeah,
point, right at that point, it's like, man, like, what relationship do we really have?
it is so different now, Patrick. I mean, it's amazing how different it is because of the NIL and the transfer portal, you know, and coaches are also very concerned about this player is going to be a really good player, but he's not getting the playing time he wants, so he's going to leave. How can I keep him in the program and help him develop into the player that's going to be a top line SEC player? It's different. How would I juggle that? It'd be tough. It would be tough because I really love my players. And I remember one year I had a few players transfer out of the program. And this was way before the transfer portal. It crushed me. It was like, what did I do wrong? How can I be a better coach so that players won't leave? So I took it personal. And I think now coaches at the high level, they really can't let themselves take it too personal. They got to look at it almost as a business. Like, this program might not be good for this player. He's going to get more playing time here. He's going to get more exposure here because maybe he's a catcher and he's third on the depth chart and he's not going to fulfill his dream here. So I understand he's going to go to another program. And that was painful for me, but I think I would have adjusted. I adjusted through changes, not as major as the transfer portal and the NIL situation, but I did make it through changes and I adjusted. I think it's easier for younger coaches to adjust to that. I think it's much more difficult for older coaches to adjust to it. I've talked to many younger coaches that they just accept it and they adapt. And I've talked to a few older coaches. It's like, man, I don't know how much longer I can do this because it's so different. Because maybe perhaps they were a coach that wanted to pour value into their players, and that's my whole thing. I really believe that coaches have an opportunity to impact and influence players, perhaps more so than any other profession I know. I mean, teachers do it, but teachers have you 1 hour a day. Coaches have you multiple hours a day and on the weekends and on the bus and all those things. If we don't, even in today's game, if we don't take an opportunity to impact and influence these players in a positive way, we're missing out on an incredible opportunity to help make our communities better, our states better, and our nation better. It sounds
Yeah.
big, but I really feel that. If you look at all the athletes that play sports across our country, and if all of them had coaches who really wanted to influence them in a positive way and really pour value into their lives, not just into their game, but into their lives, think about how that could change our nation because as you know, many athletes go on to become leaders in their community. What kind of leaders are they going to be? Perhaps a good leader if we pour value into them. And so I think it's a big job.
Yeah, yeah, everything you said there was spot on. I think another component of it is, you said, teachers may only have them for 1 hour a day, or even if they did have them for the whole day. Let's face it. I mean, kids, they're more likely going to be paying attention to something they love doing, like playing baseball, than algebra class, or they want to be out there playing baseball and getting better at it. Like whether or not how good they want to be at algebra or whatever it is, like, that can be that can
Yeah.
be debated, but. Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I think the other thing too is there's also an element of players. I mean, there's some young, like you said, you were 26 when you became a head coach. Obviously, that's very young, but also the players that these coaches are coaching, like those are also tomorrow's coaches. Those are the future of at some point college baseball too. And so you also never know who you're coaching they could be coaching for the next 40 years themselves. At least that's something I always thought about when I worked with players, especially from a hitting standpoint. It's like, man, yeah, I get it. They're in high school right now, but I could be competing with these guys, at some point down
Yeah,
the road.
that's exactly right. And back to that point too, Patrick, of of how much influence we have. Like, let's face it, a lot of the players that coaches coach, um, you know, hopefully many of them have healthy relationships with their parents and their fathers, but some don't. And so that coach becomes the authority figure, the father figure. And when I was 15 years old, I had a great dad. He wasn't a baseball guy, but he was a great dad. But there comes a time in your life where you don't really listen to your father like you should. But man, I listened to my coaches. And that doesn't mean the coaches were better people than my dad at all. It just means that's where my interest was. That was my passion. And so my coach could tell me, "Hey, we're going to run 8 miles today." And not being a very good distance runner, I wouldn't make it, but I'd sure try.
Yeah.
and with my dad, it was like, I don't know. And so that influence we have is really special, and I hope more and more coaches take advantage of that. So many coaches are so into the mechanics and the analytics and all those things, and those are good things. I love talking baseball, and I love talking pitching mechanics and delivery, and I love learning more about spin rates and all that. But, there's more value that can be given to those players too. And it has to do with character, it has to do with work ethic, it has to do with all those positive things that's going to make them a better husband, a better father, a better citizen, a better employee. And so, I think coaches need to take advantage of that.
Learning how to compete, I think, is something that coaches, if they can try to teach that, if that can be like a skill, just competition, I think that would be extremely beneficial. And so my question to you, Keith, is like, is that something that you feel like, or you were able to do, was to teach players how to compete? Like you hear of obviously like the legendary stories of, Michael Jordan, like all these guys who are just like psycho competitors and like would just never quit. And no matter what, if they lost, they're back in the gym right away, whatever. Like, I don't know if you can like teach that level of obsession, but I'm just curious, like, is there something that you would do or instill or talk about with players that you felt like helped them get to a point where they would be able to compete more, and it translated, yes, of course, into baseball, but maybe it's getting competing for a job or whatever, because the world is cutthroat. I mean, it does come down to competition.
That's right. Yeah. You could definitely teach those values to the players. I mean, you made a great illustration there with Michael Jordan. I mean, he was, I say this respectfully, he was sort of a freak of nature too. He was incredibly gifted athletically, but he was also incredibly competitive. And not every player that comes into our programs are that competitive. There's different levels, but you can improve that competitiveness in players. And one of the ways we did it was through competitive practices. Every practice there was something on the line, whether it was an inter squad game or drills. There were winners and losers, and almost everyone I know likes to win. And so if you teach that every day, and some of it too, Patrick, is a level of maturity. The more mature players who have passion for the game are going to compete a little bit better than the immature player that has a passion for the game. They're not going to give in. Like I always think about two-strike hitting. To me, that's one of the great ways to evaluate a true competitor. Now, in the major league game, they're still going for the fences with two strikes in this age. But at the high school and travel ball and college level, the two-strike approach is a phenomenal way to teach competitiveness and to let players know that, hey, this is a team game, and we don't need a home run here. We just need the guy on deck to have a chance to get his at bat. And the way to do that is to shorten up a little bit, become a bulldog in the box and just compete. And I see a lot of players because my grandson is playing high school baseball now, and he's been in the travel ball stuff and all that. I see some situations as it's a showcase mentality, and there's nothing wrong with showcases. I love showcases as a coach because I got to see a lot of good players in one setting. But there comes a time when you have to dig in with two strikes and maybe foul off a few pitches or maybe take one under the chin or whatever. And that's where you really see the competitive nature of the hitter. And then as a pitcher, what do you do when you come in with the bases loaded? How do they handle that situation? So that is a huge piece of it. And I promise you, every college coach wants competitive people in that dugout. They want talented people, but a talented person that doesn't know how to compete isn't as valuable as an average athlete that is a great competitor. They're just not. They're not going to help you win as many games.
I also think, and you would be able to speak to this more than I, but I also think there's an element to that, just that team chemistry when you do have people who are in there who are competing, and they bring everybody else along with them, right? They bring everybody else to another level. And yeah, like you can't quantify chemistry, but I think if you talk to anybody who's been on championship teams and winning teams, like there is something different about that clubhouse, that locker room that you just, you can't really put your finger on exactly what it is, but there is something there. So I do think there is an element to that. And for me, one of the things that I like looking at if I'm watching how someone, if they do compete or not from, like, let's just say a hitting standpoint, I love nothing more than, for some reason, Keith, I love nothing more than watching a hitter strike out like their first at bat of the game, like even if it's on 3 pitches. The worse the worse they look, the better, right? The 3 pitches, they swing and miss at all 3, or whatever it is. Maybe they strike out looking, and then their next at bat, the very first pitch, or it's a fastball right down the middle, and they're swinging. Like for me, it's like I love that because it's like, man, like they're not letting the previous at bat change at all from their mindset. And it's like, to me, when I see that, I love it so much. It's like, that's a freaking competitor right there. Like I love it.
Yeah. And I promise you, when coaches go out and evaluate players at a showcase or it's a travel ball level or high school, whatever, they notice that big time, because every coach wants that competitive person on their team. And that stuff it's contagious. If a freshman sees a junior competing that way, then he's going to want to do it. And I think I'm glad you're talking about that, because I think that's one of the most underrated things talked about in baseball today is the competitiveness of the athlete. You can have a beautiful swing, you can have a great fastball, but if you're not competitive, it's not going to help the team a lot.
No. And there's also other stuff where it's like learning how to compete and play when you're tired, because you could honestly argue like that's a skill, right? Where it's like, because you're going to be tired. Like there's going to be maybe the Sunday of a 3-game series and you've been playing every day or whatever it is, where it's like, hey, like you still got to play, and you could use that to your advantage, where it's like, okay, I'm tired. That means I have less energy to overthink anything. I mean, there's definitely ways you can spin it to yourself, but I think those are other things that aren't talked about as much either. But Keith, I wanted to ask you a question about your grandson. So you said you have a grandson. He plays travel baseball. So I assume he's a good player, and I would assume he wants to play in college, especially if he's in high school playing travel baseball. So knowing what you know because of how involved in the game you currently are, plus with 25 years experience as a head coach in the SEC, what are some of the things that you see going on in the travel baseball world, or maybe that your grandson's doing or not doing or whatever, that you're kind of like, this is not a good use of anyone's time, but everyone still does it because of FOMO or whatever it is?
Great question. I see a lot of really good things going on in travel baseball. I see a lot of opportunities for players that I didn't have. I played American Legion baseball, which was, I mean, back in those days, it was the top form of travel baseball. Although I think we only made it out of state maybe twice during the summer, but we had a great experience, and it fulfilled that summer that where we needed to play and compete. The positive things I see are the opportunities. I mean, the more at bats a hitter gets against good competition, my opinion, the better he's going to be. Same with pitching. You know, the more times you face quality hitters, you have to learn how to pitch. So it's a very positive thing. I think sometimes we travel coaches, travel organizations overdo the travel part to where it becomes so expensive for families, and it consumes the family. You know, I've got a little granddaughter that has traveled along on, what does a 10-year-old girl or 11-year-old girl do that's more interested in horses and those kinds of things, and they're not interested in baseball or softball or those kind of sports. I mean, they're bored out of their minds. And just the cost, I think we've made it cost prohibitive to kids like me. My parents could have never afforded for me to play on a travel team. And, there's probably kids in Cincinnati and Lexington and Louisville and Indianapolis who can't probably afford to play. They're good athletes. So now they put their focus in football, or they put their focus in basketball. So I think we're missing out on some great athletes in our game because of that. But I see the pros and the cons. I mean, to be honest with you, I loved high school baseball, but I also really look forward to getting to play Legion ball, because there's something special about competing with guys from other high school programs that are really good. And I think when you compete against good players, you get better. When you compete with good players, you get better. So that's the positive. The negative is the expense, the disruption of the family, and even families. I've had many talks with parents about this. Let's say a family is a typical Southern or Midwestern family who, they love to go to church on Sunday. They love family. Well, all of a sudden that's over. Not only that family is disrupted, but an entire lifestyle is disrupted. So it's a tremendous investment and sacrifice for families, but it's also a wonderful thing for the player who has the opportunity to compete at a high level.
This is kind of a side question to that, but if maybe you haven't thought of it, maybe you have. I've thought of it. I haven't really come up with any solutions, but is there a way to make it more affordable?
I think it is. I think there is a way, and I think it's going to take a lot more work, for the travel ball coaches, but they should have scholarships, I think, just like colleges. And some do. I know some give opportunities, and I applaud those organizations that do that. But I see so many kids, and they walk into the ballpark, and they've got two bats that cost over, between the bats are $500 or $600. They've got them in their bat bag, and they've got a $300 glove. It is crazy how much money is spent. It's a billion-dollar industry, and that's good. But what about the kid whose dad works at a factory, and his mother maybe works at the elementary school as a cook or as a teacher's assistant? Those people can't do it. They just can't afford it. So, if you could, if a travel organization could have fundraiser specifically for scholarshiping players that can't afford to play. I think that'd be a great thing. And also another thing that's lacking a little bit is the development aspect. Unless a kid is going to, and a lot of them do, they get individual instruction. That's a wonderful thing if they can afford to do that and play travel baseball. But if they can't, if they could, I don't even know how to say this, but maybe at an early age, they have like a B level where good athletes from low income families can go to a facility and learn how to play the game better, work on their hitting, work on their pitching, and then play travel ball. And then some of those kids that couldn't afford to be on the A team, when they develop their skills a little bit, they get scholarshiped into the A team. That would take a lot of fundraising, but I'm thinking about your area of Cincinnati. There's some very affluent neighborhoods around the city of Cincinnati and within Cincinnati, but there's also, like every other city, there's some low income neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the best football players and basketball players come out of those low income neighborhoods. If baseball could learn how to reach in and recruit those players to play baseball, and that, I know that is going on in some situations, but if they can't afford to play, if they could scholarship them just because they want to play and they're athletic. On a side note, I watched Michael Jordan. We talked about him earlier. I watched him play baseball. He was an incredible athlete that looked extremely awkward as a baseball player. I don't know if you've seen any videos.
Yeah.
But, it's like, how can this guy look so athletic on a basketball court and so unathletic on a baseball field? Well, it's because he didn't get the instruction and the playing time that other kids got. So he doesn't have the good actions and the short swing and all those things. But if we could reach those people where they are and get them involved in coming to the facilities where they get batting instruction, where they get pitching instruction, to playing summer baseball at a high level, the cream's going to rise to the top.
Well, I love that idea. I my mind's spinning with different ideas, or maybe it's even now. I'm like, you mentioned the scholarship idea. Maybe it's like there's some, eventually organization that is ahead of all the travel orgs, and so you have to kind of like how the NCAA implements different rules. Like maybe there's something with travel orgs, like, hey, you're required to give, a certain amount of scholarships per year. I love that. I think that's a great idea, actually. So I think that's great, and hopefully someone listening to this, maybe some ideas spark with them too. But I think that's a great idea, Keith. Talk to me a little bit about I know you're a writer too. Like you've done some writing, you've done, you've been involved with a magazine now for a number of years. Now you just have a new book that came out. I'm a big reader from a book standpoint. So talk to me more about the writing process for your book. Was that hard?
In some ways it was hard, but in some ways it was so therapeutic, because once I would lock in and just get into the writing mode, you and I are baseball guys. So once I got locked in, there were so many things I wanted to write about. I felt like when I got finished with the book, Coaching with Purpose, I felt like I had enough information to write 2 more books. And it was, the hard part for me was to condense and to put in the book the things that I thought would help coaches today. If you get around baseball people, we're all storytellers. We love to tell stories about, hey, you remember watching this game that this happened or whatever. And so people love to hear stories. My wife has heard my stories a few too many times, but yeah, I mean, it was fun for me. The challenging part, to be honest with you, was, okay, I've written a book. Now what? I want coaches to read this book. How do I do that? I'm not a marketing guy. I'm not a social media guy, really. I'm on social media, but that's not my gift. So how do I get it out there? And so that has been challenging, but at the same time, it's going very well. And it's one of those things where I think if you have value in your book, it's going to get out. Coaches tell other coaches about it. The word does get out. So it's been good. It's been a great experience, and the reviews have been so far better than I expected, because it's my first book, and I thought I would get some negative reviews that said this guy needs to, he needs to stick to talking to coaches or whatever. But it hasn't been like that. I just think that I just don't see a lot of baseball books. I see some books on the, on hitting, and I see some books on pitching, and I see some books written by, about people like Yogi Berra and, biographies and things like that. They're great books, but I don't see many books that help coaches coach. And I just felt like that was a void in the baseball world. And it's not that mine's the only book, but it's one of the few. And I just wanted to get positive information out there, not only to help coaches be better coaches, but to keep them coaching. Because as we talked about earlier in the podcast, so many coaches burn out, whether it's a youth league coach that just, the time element and all that gets in the way. But once you understand the why of coaching, then you're going to stay with it, because you love the game. You love, more importantly, the players who play the game. And that's what my book is all about. How do we reach the players who play the game? Because that's who we coach. We don't really coach baseball. We coach baseball players. And so that's the basis of the book. And if any of your listeners would like to get a copy, my website is coachkeithmadison.com. And there's ways to order the book through Amazon and my publisher and through me personally, if you want to do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to read the book myself. I just bought it, so I can't wait to check it out. And everything you just said, I mean, obviously, look, in terms of, what you wrote about, I think the first thing people are going to, want to know is like, are you qualified to talk about it? Well, obviously you're qualified, right? Because, you were a head coach for over 25 years. You've been in the game your entire life. So you have a ton of experience. We'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. And we'll put it out when we tweet out the episode on social media too. But
Appreciate it.
Keith, thanks so much for coming on, man. I'm really glad we got to connect. And I think I'm excited, like I said, to read it, to check it out. And I think it's different because it's not mechanical. It's not, and a lot of that stuff, I think the older you get and the longer you're in the game, you get kind of bored of that stuff too. You want something that's deeper, it's more meaningful and fulfilling. And I think this book fits that mold, at least for myself personally. But thanks so much for coming on today.
Absolutely, Patrick. It's been a blast. I always love talking baseball. So thanks for having me on.